Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi guys, welcome back. I'm so glad you're here today. Today we have a special guest. Her name is Natalia Rachel, and she's coming to us from Australia, and she is a trauma expert, and she speaks all over the world about how to heal trauma. She believes that if you heal your trauma, you can change the world. And I am so excited for her to be here today to talk to us about teaching our kids and ourselves to have more self-compassion. With that, let's get to Natalia.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So today we're going to be talking about this idea that we can teach our kids how to have self-compassion and like how to do that. So I'm so glad that you're here to talk about this. Can you start with talking to us about what is self-compassion? Like, what does that even mean?
In simplest terms, self-compassion is our ability to meet ourselves with understanding and kindness.
Yeah, which is so important because oftentimes I find that we are probably kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. We are definitely our own worst enemy sometimes, our toughest critic. Do you find that too?
Absolutely. I think we are all so hard on ourselves, and particularly our generation of adults. I think we've been primed to be that way, and it can be so much easier to be kinder to others, but we forget to show ourselves that same kindness or self-compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about self-compassion, is this something that people are born with or that we kind of grow into having? Like, how does self-compassion work in that way?
Self-compassion is something we develop through mirroring and reflection. And there are two different ways that we learn it. One is if we are surrounded by people, and ideally it's our mother and our father and our family unit. But as our world expands, as we grow older, it's also our greater family, our community, the world at large, social media, and all of these influences. If we're being reflected words of affirmation and kindness, we're going to learn, oh, I am wonderful. I am good. There is grace offered to me, and therefore I can offer it to myself. So that's one way we learn. And the other way is we listen to the way those people around us treat themselves, either with self-compassion or self-contempt. So, for example, if we have a parent or a community group who are very gracious and compassionate to themselves, we're going to learn that that's how we should treat ourselves too. Whereas if we're surrounded by people or sort of models that are very self-deprecating, full of self-contempt, we're going to likely develop the same way of relating with ourselves.
Yeah, that can be really hard because what we see is kind of what we do. And I think that's one of the hardest parts of parenting too, is that our kids are looking to us for guidance often. And it's lovely, but then also hard because we're still growing sometimes, oftentimes as humans too, right? Like we're still learning things. So that can be a hard part. So when we think about self-compassion, you touched on this a little bit. What are things that can positively impact our self-compassion or negatively impact our self-compassion? So we talked about models, but what other things can impact that?
I think it is all about modeling and all about reflection. So if we are receiving positive affirmations and if we are given grace when we take missteps, um, or step out of line or fall out of alignment, that's how we're going to learn that we can be self-compassionate. Whereas if we're surrounded by people who are shaming or blaming or not very forgiving, it's going to be very hard for ourselves. And I think the difficult thing is that many of us have grown up in families or communities and in a greater world that is very full of shame and blame and polarity. And it's really hard when everything is telling us you're bad, you're wrong, you could be better. Come on, climb the ladder, be better, be perfect, smile for the camera. It's really hard. So to me, it's almost like a daily meditation or a daily prayer to disconnect from those voices that come in many directions from the past and the present and say, actually, that's not the way I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to become my own model. And that is essentially what reparenting is about. So many of us are on the journey of reparenting ourselves, where we see that we're so hard on ourselves. We're just shaming and blaming ourselves all of the time. We're really quick to judge ourselves. And I think there's an epic journey in noticing every time we speak poorly or meanly to ourselves and set about it and say, that's not how I'm going to treat myself, because that perpetuates us continuing to become the kind of person that we don't really want to be and the kind of model that we don't really want to be for our children.
Mm-hmm. How important do you think it is for us to be talking to our kids about this part? So, like, let's say we are kind of reparenting ourselves or being a good model, reflecting back, noticing when maybe we've said something unkind to ourselves or been unjustly harsh. How important is it to include our kids in that conversation?
I think it really depends on a number of factors, including the age of our children, and the kind of response that they're having to it. So if our children witness us being very self-deprecating or hard on
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, it can be helpful after the fact to have a conversation and say, hey, the way I was talking to myself or treating myself, that's not a great way to be. And I'm learning to be kinder to myself. And I want
Mm-hmm.
you to learn to be kind to yourself too. So I think when it's repair based like that, it's really important. But I also feel it's really important not to loop our kids in too deeply to our process. And it can kind of backfire or take us in the other direction where it creates a dynamic of enmeshment where our kids are so connected to our process. And I know for me and for many of the mothers and fathers that I work with, there's a lot around allowing our kids to be sovereign and not projecting our own process onto them. So it's a little bit of a tricky balance, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Well, I think I love your answer of like how to go back and kind of repair that because, sometimes we might do something and be like, oh, I'm such an idiot. And then, our kids heard us say that, but we might say like, don't say that. And then to go back and say, hey, that wasn't very kind. I noticed I'm thinking about that and thinking like, I wish I would have been kinder to myself, given myself a little bit of grace. Like I know that I'm trying and sometimes when we try, we mess up and that's okay. And we can be
Mm-hmm.
imperfect and still good. And I think modeling that part when our kids hear it, but to bring them into our trauma per se or our history is maybe not necessary because that kind of bogs them down, right? It kind of brings them into that and makes them feel responsible for something that they can't be responsible for, but also um, gives them that kind of like parentified role of like an equal in that. And they don't really need to be that. Like where I think us allowing kids to be kids is such an important part of childhood, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's hard to play when you're worried about your mom or your dad, right? And so to be able to do those really important things in life, not bringing them in is a good idea.
Yeah, I think there's three really important things weaved into what you're talking about. One is accountability. So owning when we speak in ways that are not helpful and that could be harmful to ourselves or our children. So that accountability piece. Then there's the humanity piece is not trying to model perfection to our children. I've worked with so many mothers who are trying so hard to be perfect role models that they hide their humanity. Our kids need to know that we make mistakes and we're learning and we're healing and we're evolving because that allows them to be human and perfect too. And then there's another piece around boundaries, which is like, this is my stuff. This is my stuff to heal. It's not yours, baby. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a really beautiful thing to keep letting our children know because they will tend to want to merge and mesh with us when they're very little, because that's part of their development. A huge piece of development is that they're learning to individuate and they're learning to be their own people. And so when they see us upset, they're going to feel it too. Or when they feel our nervous system spiking into survival, theirs is likely going to do that too. And there's a beautiful piece in supporting their individuation when we notice we're activated and that they're activated too. It's to say, this is mama's, babe. Like, this is not yours. Just because mama's stressed, you don't have to be stressed too. And I think it's a beautiful practice to offer our children that really helps them learn, oh, when mummy's distressed or daddy's distressed, that's theirs and it's not
Mm-hmm.
mine. And gosh,
Mm-hmm.
how different we would be if
Oh
our
my
parents
gosh. Wow.
had
Yes.
offered us this, right? We probably wouldn't all be in therapy.
Yes. Okay. So this kind of brings up the program that you have just started, this trauma conscious mama that you are promoting. Can you tell us a little bit about that program? Because families might be interested.
Sure, the Trauma Conscious Mama is a program to help us understand the way that we potentially project or pass or transmit our own trauma or conditioning onto our children. So we look at the concept of maternal intergenerational trauma, paternal intergenerational trauma, and the way that we not only mother, but the way we show up as a partner and also the way we show up in sisterhood or community, because it's everything, right? We're humans and we're existing in all of these dimensions and all of these different dynamics. And it's a really powerful process for us to understand, oh, this is how I learned to relate here. This is how I learned to be a woman here. And we look at what are the blessings? Because there are many blessings. What are the things I actively do want to pass down and do want to continue to model? But also, what are the difficult things that perhaps are harmful? And how do I look at setting these boundaries with myself and showing up in a different way? And it's really like a doorway to very deep processing and a continued lifelong journey because we are carrying generations of trauma inside us and generations of conditioning that doesn't really serve us. And I think we're at a point in humanity right now where there are more and more of us who are ready and choosing, actually, that's not how I want to be here. This isn't the mother I want to be. This isn't the partner I want to be. This isn't the community or the sisterhood that I want to create. Um, and it's really been beautiful to see the receptivity to this work here in Australia. And in a couple of months, I'll be teaching it in Singapore. And it's been incredible to see the hunger for it and uptake. And I do hope to bring it to the US somewhere, potentially next year.
Yes, we would love that. It sounds like a great program that you're doing. So tell us, like, how, besides modeling, is there anything else that we can do or like words that we can give our kids to help them build their own compassion?
I think there are so many ways to do it, but it's more about when we see our child perhaps being hard on themselves or moving to shame, we can just let them know, I offer you grace, babe, or, it's okay to make a mistake. I love you anyway. And I really think it's just as simple as that. So it's catching our children in moments where they're being hard on themselves and letting them know you are loved and you don't need to be hard on yourself. So whatever words that feel natural to you and to your family, it's about offering them and breaking that cycle. Because kids, even if we're not modeling sort of shame or self-criticism, kids will experience shame, which is the opposite of compassion regularly, because it's part of learning to belong in the world. And I don't know if you've remembered when you're young. For me, there have been so many experiences, not even when I'm young, now when I'm trying to learn to do something new and I'm not getting it quite right, or I make a mistake, it's quite normal for us to move to shame. Oh, I'm silly, I'm stupid, I'm bad. Why can't I be better? And our kids really experience that because they're learning new things every day. And I think it's noticing those moments when they're trying to learn and they're not quite getting it to let them know that's okay. It's normal to not be perfect. And you learn through not doing it right.
hmm Well, and I think I love that idea because I think we all are you have to make mistakes. I mean, that's part of learning, like you said. And I think for us as parents to be able to offer to our kids this idea that like we still love them no matter what. And I think that's the truth, right? Oftentimes, though, we sometimes get bogged down with what everybody else is doing or what other people's kids are doing or what we hope for our kids. Like it is natural for us to have a dream for our kids, but oftentimes I don't know that I've met my parents' dream, but I'm living my dream. And so I think that part is important is that like our kids may be different than we imagine them. I think all of my kids are different, but also lovely, like so great. But to offer them that grace of like finding their own space and also being proud of themselves, right? Like it's not just about us doing that, but I think that's part of self-compassion too, of like Yeah, I did make a mistake on that, or man, I missed a couple math questions, but I really studied hard for this. Like, I feel proud of what I did, and to give yourself compassion to not be perfect, but also be trying and also to strive for more. Like, it's okay to want more for yourself, but also to be kind to yourself in the moment of like, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to grow versus I'm already there. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think we are in constant emergence and constant development and allowing our kids to enjoy the process. I think many of us grew up with a very clear agenda and a very
Mhm.
clear path that was laid out before us by our parents. And it's why many of us are now having midlife crisis and feel like this isn't the path I wanted. And I think it's more about letting our kids find their own path and develop their own path and watching our tendency to do what many of our parents did, which is to say, this is the path. This is the path. You go to school, you get good grades, you go to university, you buy a car, you buy a house, you get married, you have children at the end. And I think
Mhm.
many of us now, we're realizing this is not the path I want. And I think then when it comes to parenting is to not try and project that same agenda-based way of learning and developing onto our children. Learning is actually very evolutionary and very nonlinear. And as humans, we are too. So we might find some of our children do not enjoy the academic path. Maybe they're into sports. Maybe they're into the arts. Maybe they just need some time to figure themselves out. And I think as parents, we can get triggered when our children aren't following what is normal. I'm doing
Mhm.
little air quotes, but as the world continues to evolve, we're realizing there isn't really a normal and life is not linear. So, what is it like if we let our kids be non-linear? And in order to do that, we have to look at our own judgments and our own conditioning, which comes back to the self-compassion piece.
Yeah. Like, so important because I do think that I think it's fear, right? That's what drives that part of us trying to keep our kids on a path is like we're afraid of what might happen if they don't.
Yeah.
And I know that I mean fear is strong in all of us. It is a mechanism to keep us safe, but I in my practice I talk about a real alarm or a false alarm, right? Because our alarm system kind of works like a smoke detector. And so like it's either on or off. And when we get that signal that this is a potential threat, like something bad could happen, our alarm goes on, and then we start doing things to help us feel better. But in those moments, like the real growth is to allow our kids to explore themselves and figure out what makes them happy. Because I don't know about you, but what I have learned is happiness is way more valuable than my paycheck. I get that I have to pay the bills, but being happy in that is so important.
I think you can't really buy peace, can you? It
Hmm.
can be really helpful to understand the smoke alarm that you're talking about, the two main fears. And one is survival, and it is financial based. We're worried our kids aren't going to be able to grow up and pay the bills and keep a roof over their head. And then the
Hmm.
other fear is around belonging. We are worried that our kids are going to be exiled and not fit in. And again, most of this will come back to our own fear based conditioning. I mean, of course, there is a very real piece in the here and now where, you know, the economy is going crazy, rents are skyrocketing, cost of living skyrocketing, and we're freaking out a little, many of us. And we do live in a very exclusionary world that's built on clubs. But I think interrupting those smoke alarms, as you said, and our fear-based conditioning and walking the path to co-create something different, even if it's within the sanctity of our little family unit, that's where the healing is and that's where the change is. And if we can just offer our kids that at home, they're more likely to go out and co-create a world where the same dynamics exist beyond the home.
Yeah, I love that idea. So if you could speak directly to kids or teens about this idea of self-compassion, what would you want to say to them? What do you want them to know?
The most important thing in this world is our relationship with ourselves. And if we can focus on creating one where we meet ourselves with understanding and kindness and care, only good things will emerge from there.
I love that. And finally, I just want to ask you with this idea of self-compassion, how has it helped you to grow as a person?
Self compassion is the antidote to shame. And as somebody who grew up in a lot of trauma and with a lot of modeling of self-hatred, actually, learning and accessing self-compassion changed my life, and it continues to change my life. So to me, it is a daily practice, a moment-to-moment practice.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been so enlightening. I love what you're doing and teaching people about trauma and helping them to heal. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me in a great conversation.
Thanks again, Natalia. I so appreciate the conversation. I loved how she described the antidote to shame is self-compassion. What an important part for us to take away. I think oftentimes as parents, we're really hard on ourselves, and sometimes we're really hard on our kids, and oftentimes they're very hard on themselves. And so I think understanding self-compassion, modeling that for our kids and allowing them to see that example and also helping to build that in themselves will help them to go further and live into their best life. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please rate and subscribe to our show. Continue to share us with your friends and family. And also follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And if you wouldn't mind, please continue to send the emails. We are loving the emails with requests for topics. If you'd like to contribute, send that to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.